The night the walls knocked, I timed the silence between them and heard a timer pretending to be a ghost. Tap, tap, then quiet. Another tap. Exactly 10 seconds later. It wasn't random. It wasn't haunted. It was mechanical. I stood in the dining room of my father's house in Salem, Massachusetts, 3 weeks after closing on the deed. October 19th, 2024. Harbor fog pressed against the windows, and the faint wail of a ship's horn carried through the glass. The overhead bulbs stuttered like they were gasping for life, their filament buzz weaving with the rhythm of those knocks in the plaster. Lena, my wife, gripped my arm so hard her nails left half-moon marks. Her voice trembled, rehearsed yet terrified. "It wants us gone, Harris." The word "wants" hung in the air like smoke. I swallowed hard, not because I believed her, but because in that moment, with the shadows jerking across the mantel, I thought about my father's initials carved into the wood just beneath the varnish. HC burned there by his hand when he was young. This house wasn't just wood and brick. It was the last thing he gave me before he passed in July. My inheritance, my retirement, my legacy. And here I was, listening to taps that weren't taps, being told the house wanted me gone. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I steadied Lena, walked over to the breaker box. My fingertips brushed the metal cover. It was warm, but the load meter wasn't spiking. No surge, no short. Just an odd warmth and a faint tang of machine oil that didn't belong in an electrical panel built in the 80s. I logged the time. 9:13 p.m. I'd been in building inspections too long not to note details. When the knocks finally stopped, Lena clung to me as though silence was more frightening than noise. I held her hand, but my mind was racing. Breakers don't heat up for no reason. And oil doesn't smell like ghosts. The next morning I found it. On the dining table, tucked half under a candle, was a pale green slip, a receipt dated October 18th. One day before the knocking began. Cleansing service, $2,800, paid cash. The handwriting on the paid signature line was shaky, like someone trying to mimic authority. I held it up in the morning light. "Lena," I asked carefully, "where did this come from?" She breezed into the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. Voice rehearsed again. "Oh, the neighbors must have sent them out of concern." Sweet, isn't it? Sweet. Except we hadn't met a single neighbor yet. Not a soul. I folded the slip and slid it into my shirt pocket. That's when my phone buzzed. A realtor email. "If the home must be vacated," it read. "We have cash buyers interested in an immediate closing." Attached were 3 investor names with offers. Offers I hadn't solicited. Confused, I turned toward Lena. Her phone was on the counter, face up, buzzing again. A notification flashed. Evan Pike. I didn't need to open it to see the preview of the message. "If he bolts, I can list by Friday." The words hit me harder than the knocks ever could. I pressed my thumb against the mantel, tracing my father's initials rough under the varnish. For a moment, shame flushed through me. Was I paranoid? Was I seeing patterns because grief hollowed me out? But the evidence stacked in my pocket and on her phone told a different story. This house wasn't set haunted. It was being staged. That night, Lena stood by the window, curtains drawn tight, whispering about cold spots and evil eyes. I stood beside her, quiet, my mind miles away. The house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to heal after burying my father. But now it felt like a stage play designed to unnerve me into leaving. The weight of legacy pressed on me. My father had worked 40 years in the docks, scraped together every penny to buy this home free and clear. He left it to me as proof I'd never be without roots. And Lena, my wife, my supposed partner, was weaving fear into its walls like she could unravel history itself. That night, I made a choice. I chose investigation over panic. If it was spiritual, we'd stand in the daylight and face it. If it was human, daylight would burn it. I began quietly. I wrote down the exact sequence of the knocks. 10 seconds apart. Regular, mechanical. I marked the flicker times of the lights. The faint hum near the vent. I kept the $2,800 slip hidden in my desk drawer, tucked between envelopes of utility bills. Proof. not for now, but for later. When Lena whispered, "We should think about moving, Harris. For safety," I just nodded. My silence was camouflage. In the dim light of the bedroom, while she scrolled through her phone, I stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "Dad, I won't let them take this house from me. Not like this." The knocks didn't return that night, but the silence was worse, because silence meant planning. Someone, my wife, maybe with Evan, was planning my exit from my father's house. And as much as it shredded me to admit it, the haunting wasn't about spirits. It was about money, about power, about control. By the time dawn split the blinds, I'd made my vow if ghosts wanted me gone, I'd call their bluff. And if it was people behind the ghosts, I'd expose them in daylight, no matter how much it hurt. Because this wasn't just about me, this was about a legacy. By October 24th, the house taught me how to count fear. It started at 3:03 a.m. With the oven timer dinging from a kitchen I knew I hadn't set used. I lay there in the dark, listening to the fridge compressor hum up through the floorboards, and then like a cue from an unseen stage manager, the whisper slid through the dining room vent. "Get out." 20 seconds. Exactly 20 seconds later, it came again. "Get out." I stared at the red glow of the alarm clock. 3:04, 3:05, marking each repetition on the notepad I'd begun keeping by the bed. 20 seconds. Over and over, more metronome than malice. I could feel my heartbeat trying to match it, accelerating, then stumbling. The sound wasn't a voice the way a person's voice is. It carried the thin, tinny profile of a cheap speaker shoving breath through metal slats. Still, at 3 a.m., the body doesn't argue nuance with fear. "Lena," I whispered, "do you hear that?" She was already sitting up, hair tangled, phone angled just so. "I set and live," she mouthed, then louder for her audience. "We can set sleep anymore. It wants us gone." The screen lit her face with soft blues and pinks, the color palette of curated panic. Comments flew. Skulls, emojis, prayers, the word "run" in a waterfall of capital letters. My home had become someone else's horror content. I slid out of bed and followed the whisper down the hall, careful not to step on the board that squeaked by the laundry room. The vent grill in the dining room trembled faintly with each phrase like a throat swallowing. I pressed my palm to the plaster beside it. The wall felt cool and steady, indifferent to the drama it had been drafted into. "Get out." On the fourth repetition, the oven timer chimed again. One sharp ding, not enough to be an alarm, just enough to convince a tired brain that something unseen was playing the house like an instrument. I walked to the kitchen and put my ear to the stainless. Nothing but the low industrial exhale of an appliance at rest. When I turned back, I noticed the breaker panel again. Warm. Not hot, but warm enough to insist on attention. I clicked my phone light and scanned along the baseboard. A thin haze trembled there, more imagined than seen, like the breath of glycerin fog that hadn't fully settled. By sunrise, I'd recorded 22 iterations of "Get Out" spaced at consistent 20-second intervals. I had times, I had temperatures, I had the beginning of a pattern, but patterns do not tuck exhausted men back into sleep. Lena let the stream run until sunlit dust exposed the theater, motes hanging like confetti above the table. "We can live like this," she told the phone. "We might have to leave," to me, off mic. She went quiet. "I said I'm scared, Harris." "I know," I said, and I did. Fear had a texture now, like the cold of the vent and the buzz of the lights. But fear also had numbers. At 10:17 a.m., I drove to Danvers for a supply run. Nothing exotic, just fresh batteries, a voltage tester, new filters. At 10:43 a.m., waiting in line, Lena texted a screenshot of her bank app, asking if we could push the November remodel payment. "Cash is tight." I told her we'd handle it. Minutes later, while I flipped a pack of AAAs in my hand, I watched a woman ahead of me purchase a fog machine. My chest tightened in an irrational surge of recognition, then relaxed as she explained it to the cashier. Halloween party, haunted driveway, candy shoot. Danvers in late October is full of legitimate ghosts for hire. But later, back in Salem, the credit card ledger told a less innocent story. A $699 purchase at a party supply wholesaler in Danvers had hit our joint account the day before. The memo line read FX Fog Kit. I took a screenshot, circled the number, and titled the image Danvers, $699, October 23rd. When I asked Lena about it over lunch, she barely looked up from her soup. Client props, she said. Holiday shoot, I told you. You told me we were broke, I said gently. She blinked. It was a necessary expense. I can return it after. Fog doesn't return well, I said, but let it sit between us like steam that would cool on its own. That afternoon, I tried the cellar door. The key fought me, rough where it had been smooth 3 days earlier. When I finally got it to turn, I saw a crescent of bright brass filings like glitter along the top step. I snapped a photo, held a dime next to the filings for scale. Then I closed the door and tested it from the outside again. The cylinder stuck. A changed keyway, a bad duplicate, or a subtle way to keep me above ground at night. At 4:16 p.m., my email pinged with another blast from a brokerage mailing list I hadn't signed up for. We love distressed properties. The subject line sang, "The body promised investor interest and as-is offers if your home becomes unlivable." The examples featured were in neighborhoods I knew, houses with blue tarps and sagging porches. My father's house did not belong in that carousel. I paced the dining room and caught sight of myself in the window, a man in his 50s, grief worn like an old coat, jaw tight around the pinched smile of someone desperate to be rational. The whisper came again, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The sound clipped off at the end, the way a poor quality MP3 does when it reaches the edge of a trimmed file. No breath trailing, no room reverb, just a blunt stop. That night, the Get Out loop began again at 9:40 p.m., exactly 20 minutes after Lena started a new live stream labeled "The House Has a Message." I watched from the doorway. She cried real tears. I knew the difference. But between the lines, she was managing an audience. Hearts climbed the screen. Comments bloomed in panic flowers. Call a priest. Sell now. This is not safe for you, girl. Someone posted a link to a spiritual clearing service. Someone else tagged a local realtor. I felt the floor tilt under me, not from ghosts, but from a market forming around my fear. Enough. I closed the door, walked to the far end of the hall, and dialed the one person I thought might meet the moment with both open hands and a clipboard. Deacon O'Rourke, came the voice at the other end, warm and weathered by 1,000 hospital corridors and midnight calls. Deacon, it's Sets Harris Cole. We met last year at the parish fundraiser. I remember, he said. Your father bid too much on a silent auction pie. A beat. Tell me what's happening at your home. I told him about the knocks at 10-second intervals, the warm breaker with no load spike, the faint machine oil, the $2,800 cleansing slip dated a day before the first disturbance. I told him about the 20-second whisper loop at 3:03 a.m., about the oven ding 15 seconds after the fridge compressor kicked on, about the Danvers charge for a fog kit, about filings on the cellar step. I told him about Lena's fear, and about Evan Pike's name flashing on her phone with the words, "If he bolts, I can list by Friday." The deacon listened without interrupting, and then he said a line I since taped to the inside of a kitchen cabinet. First the natural, then the supernatural. Meaning, I asked, though I already knew. Meaning we search for wiring, devices, drafts, and human motives before we invoke heaven. Not because heaven is absent, but because truth has an order that honors both. I exhaled a breath. I didn't know I'd been holding. I can come by, he said. But if this is staged, you still need an electrician and documentation. A paper trail is a kind of prayer. It keeps the story honest. I call Stan Reezy, I said. He's been my go-to on rewires for 20 years. And a private investigator, quietly. Good, he said. And Harris? Fear is a poor architect. Don't sit, let it build the next room. After we hung up, I stood in the quiet hall and felt my father's watch band dig into my wrist, too tight. I hadn't taken a link out since the funeral. I loosened it one notch, like making space for blood to move again. In the attic later, I found a faint sweetness clinging to the rafters, glycerin's after breath, and I knew my next step wasn't to argue with Lena or shout into a camera. It was to write things down, to test, to measure, to verify. I returned to the dining room, turned off the overhead light, and listened. The whisper came right on time, then faded. I waited 20 seconds. Get out. Not tonight, I said into the vent. Not until I know your invoice number. Then I opened a fresh page in my notebook, wrote plan, and underlined it twice. Deacon O'Rourke would bring his checklist in his calm. Stan would bring a multimeter and patience. I would bring the stubbornness of a man whose name was carved into a mantel he refused to abandon. By midnight, the live stream had gone dark, and Lena was asleep. I paced the perimeter of the house, touching each door, each window, each lock, as if blessing them with my fingertips. The cellar knob scraped against the latch again, a wrongness I could feel more than hear. Tomorrow I would fix it, or at least log it. At 12:27 a.m., a final whisper skated through the vent and died. I waited for the follow-up that didn't come. Somewhere between fear and fury, I began to smile. Not because I liked any of it, but because a mystery with intervals is a problem. And problems, unlike hauntings, can be solved. October 26th, Salem woke under a lid of low gray sky, the kind that presses down until you feel it in your bones. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug, my father's mug, and laid out the pages from my notebook across the kitchen table like evidence boards. Patterns, intervals, receipts, scraps of truth that looked thin on their own but together began to hum. At 10 sharp, the doorbell rang. Deacon O'Rourke stood there in his worn brown coat, collar turned up against the harbor wind. In one hand he carried a slim folder, in the other a thermos that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "Let's start," he said without preamble, and set the folder down between us. He slid out a single sheet, creased once down the middle. At the top, discernment checklist. "First the natural, then the supernatural," he reminded me, tapping the paper with a blunt finger. "We run through causes before conclusions. Drafts, vents, wiring, timers, devices, then motives. Who benefits if you leave?" The question froze me, not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it aloud made it real. I picked up my pen and wrote 2 names. Lena, Evan. The deacon nodded. Not judgmental, just steady. "Write them down so they can set hide in shadows." I studied the checklist: carbon monoxide alarms, electromagnetic interference, trick devices, audio sources, financial incentives. My inspector's brain felt both insulted and relieved. Insulted that such fakery might exist under my roof. Relieved that the items were concrete, testable, measurable. Ghosts could play games. Invoices could not. "I shall need Stan," I said, almost to myself. "Stan Rizzi, electrician, knows this wiring better than anyone." "Good," said the deacon. "And someone to watch the people, not just the pipes." I thought of Marla Quinn, a PI had once referred to a friend during a messy custody dispute. Discreet, patient, the kind of person who notices the gum wrapper no one else sees. I thumbed her number into my phone, stared at it, then hit send. She picked up on the second ring. "Marla Quinn." "Marla, it sets Harris Cole. I need a set of eyes, discreet, possible fraud." "I've got time Thursday," she said. "Tell me what you need watched." "Fog machines. Receipts. Meetings with a realtor named Evan Pike. And my wife." Silence stretched, then understood. When I hung up, Lena breezed in from the bedroom, hair perfectly arranged despite the hour. "Who was that?" "An old work contact," I lied. "Client referral." She smiled in that distracted way people do when they are already thinking of the next performance. "Good, we could use the money." She didn't notice the checklist on the table, already folded back into the deacon's folder. After she left for a consult, I walked the house like it was a crime scene. Every vent grill, every outlet plate, every odd hum became a suspect. At the hall vent, one screw shone brighter than the others, newer, less dulled by years of dust. I crouched, snapped a photo, and circled the gleam with my fingertip. At the living room outlet, a faint scuff marred the paint just around the cover, like a hand had twisted more than once. Evidence doesn't shout. It whispers the way the vents had whispered, "Get out," and like any inspector worth his license, I had learned to listen. That evening, I recorded a private memo into my phone, voice low, as if even the walls might be listening. If I'm wrong, I said, I'll apologize to Lena on mic. I'll take the humiliation because love deserves humility. But if I'm right, I stopped, throat tight. If I'm right, then I'll forgive myself for taking too long to see it. At 8:43 p.m., my phone buzzed, a calendar notification. October 28th, Stan survey. Stealth. I added another October 29th. Marla Tail, Jolie Cafe. Two prongs of the plan, wire and motive. One to reveal devices, the other to catch hands feeding them. The deacon sipped from his thermos and flipped his folder closed. I said'll come by November 2nd, bring both prayer and a legal pad. That way, whichever answer we find, you settle have company. Why November 2nd? I asked. Feast of All Souls, he said, as if that explained everything. A good day to separate the living from the dead. That night, after Lena fell asleep scrolling through candle catalogs, I sat on the porch steps with the Salem air sharp in my lungs. Halloween decorations rattled on the neighboring porches, plastic skeletons, orange bulbs, a fog machine hissing faintly 2 houses down. I thought about the $699 Danvers charge, about the $2,800 cash cleansing slip, about the realtor's eager emails. This wasn't a haunting, it was an investment pitch wrapped in gauze. Still, the whispers would return. I knew they would, and when they did, I wanted to be ready. I pulled out my father's old tape measure, thumbed the dent near the 6-inch mark where he'd once dropped it from a ladder. Legacy isn't just carved initials. It's the tools left behind, still carrying their scars. I pressed the cold metal against my palm and made myself a promise. This house would not be another distressed property fed to vultures. It would remain a home. At 11:07 p.m., the vent whispered again, right on schedule. This time I didn't set flinch. I clicked my phone recorder on, let it run, and whispered back, "You have to do better than that." The voice stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any ghost. October 28th arrived with brittle sunshine, the kind that promises warmth but delivers only glare. Lena had left early for what she called a client consult, which meant the house was mine and Stan's. Stan Rizzi pulled into the drive at 10:02 a.m., his van rattling with the familiar chorus of socket wrenches and spools of wire. 57 years old, hair cropped short, glasses always slipping down his nose. Stan had rewired half the homes in Essex County. He shook my hand with the same no-nonsense grip he'd had when he taught me how to read a breaker box 20 years ago. "Talk to me," he said, lowering his voice as though the clapboard walls might overhear. I showed him the notes. Knocks at 10-second intervals. Whisper loop at 20. Breaker warmth without load spike. Fog smell, $699. Danvers charge, $2,800 cash cleansing slip. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. "Sounds like a rig job," he said. "Cheap tricks, theater gear. Let sets look." We started in the hallway. Stan knelt at the outlet with the scuff marks. He unscrewed the faceplate with a ratchet screwdriver. "See that?" he muttered. Behind the plate, hidden like a secret, was a relay. A cheap remote switch wired onto the circuit. He tapped it with his screwdriver, and the overhead light flickered on command. "That SEP's no ghost," Stan said, pulling the relay free. "That SEP's Radio Shack." We bagged the relay in a Ziploc. Evidence, not trash. Next stop, the return vent. Stan unscrewed the grill, flashlight between his teeth. He reached in and withdrew a palm-sized black box motion-triggered speaker. Dust clung to the grill, but the device itself gleamed with newness. "Probably preloaded," he said. Switching it on, a thin, distorted voice hissed out, "Get out." I felt my throat close, not from fear this time, but from fury. We moved to the attic. The air smelled faintly of sweetness, cloying. Stan ran his hand along the ductwork until his fingers came back slick. "Glycerin," he said. "Fog conduit. Someone's been pumping atmosphere up here." He held his flashlight to the insulation where a thin hose snaked between rafters. "Stagecraft," he muttered. At 11:20 a.m. My phone buzzed. A text from Marla, Target sighting. Jolie Cafe, October 27th, 4:12 p.m. Lena with Evan Pike. Attached. The photo showed Lena and Evan at a corner table. She leaned in, smiling. He had his phone flat on the table, screen dark but angled toward her. Underneath, another text transcript snippet. Fee spooks, list as is Seb. I leaned against the beam, phone trembling in my hand. Proof. Not suspicion, not paranoia. Proof. For a moment, though, I let myself believe otherwise. I replayed the vent whisper in my mind. Let the irrational part of me cling to the idea of my father's voice returning from beyond. 2 minutes of self-deception. 2 minutes where I pretended the world had mystery instead of malice. Then I saw the interval lock in again. 20 seconds precise. Timer not demon. By noon, Stan had bagged the relay, the speaker, and samples of the glycerin residue. This is enough to write an affidavit, he said. Want me to? Yes, I said. Detail everything. Photos, timestamps, signatures. Treat it like court. He nodded, already jotting notes. That afternoon, I called attorney Lin Husu. I laid out what we'd found, devices, receipts, Marla's stills. She didn't interrupt, just breathed evenly on the other end. Preserve, Don Tet confront, she said finally. Chain of custody matters. Don Tet accused document. When the time comes, we sit. I'll make sure this isn't set just a story, it's set as evidence. At 8:55 p.m. I set 2 small audio recorders, one in the hall, one in the dining room. I wanted a clean capture. Lena came home at 9:30, carrying candles and bags from a boutique. She kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted tea, then disappeared into the bedroom. At 11:05 p.m., the whisper loop began. My recorders caught every syllable. At 11:06, Lena's key turned in the lock to the back door. Timing too neat to be coincidence. I sat in the dark dining room, listening to the vent hisse, not looking at it this time, just staring straight ahead, fists clenched on my knees. The sound wasn't pointing at the ceiling anymore, it was pointing at her. I didn't say a word. I let the recorder blink red in the corner, its small light the only witness I needed. By midnight, Lena had curled up beside me in bed, murmuring, "It's worse tonight, isn't it?" Her hand rested on my chest, warm, familiar. I wanted to ask her why she'd stage fear in the house my father built, why she'd turn grief into theater, why Evan's name belonged on her phone instead of mine. But I didn't ask. Not yet. I thought of Lynn's words, preserve, don't confront. I thought of Stan's affidavit, already drafted in neat electrician's handwriting. I thought of Marla's photo, frozen in time at Jolie Cafe. Instead of asking, I whispered into the dark, not much longer. The whisper came back from the vent. 20 seconds later, get out. I smiled. Bitter as coffee grounds. Not until Thanksgiving, I said softly. Not until everyone sips at the table. November 2nd broke crisp and bright, the kind of morning Salem sells on postcards, salt air clean as glass, gulls scribbling their signatures over Derby Street. I brewed coffee in my father's dented percolator and set 3 mugs on the counter, one for me, one for Deacon O'Rourke, one for whatever truth walked through my door. He arrived at 9:02 a.m., coat open, legal pad tucked under his arm like a hymn book. When he crossed the threshold, he didn't bless the house or sprinkle anything dramatic. He just stood still for a full breath. Eyes on the crown molding, then the floor, then me. First the natural, he said, voice low. Then the supernatural. We moved room to room like inspectors on a 2-man sweep. He asked ordinary questions in an extraordinary tone. When does the fridge compressor kick on? What time does the oven timer ding? Where was the candle when you found the $2,800 slip? I answered, and he wrote, his pencil making a calm, dry sound against the paper, a kind of music I hadn't heard in weeks. At 9:23 a.m., the fridge hummed alive, and 20 seconds later the oven let out a single chime in an empty kitchen. Deacon glanced at the appliance, then at me. No theatrics, no sermon. Just a sad half-smile like a doctor who knows the test has come back positive for something treatable but unkind. The house isn't set talking, he murmured. Something else's. He knelt by the dining room vent and set his palm on the metal. You told me you measured intervals, he said. I nodded. He listened with his hand, not his ear, like a man checking a child's forehead for fever. It's not even trying to be random, he said softly. Whoever did this wanted theater, not theology. Lena padded in at 9:40, robe cinched carelessly, eyes beautifully tired. Morning, she said, keeping her distance from Deacon like he might diagnose her too. Is this safe for you to be doing? The tremor in her voice could have been fear or rehearsed fear. I was no longer qualified to tell the difference without a document attached. Safe, the deacon said kindly. And honest. Two things ghosts rarely are. She looked down, then up. I already had someone, she gestured vaguely, cleanse it. Neighbors recommended them. We paid cash. The deacon nodded, pencil hovering. What were their names? Her lip caught between her teeth. I don't sit to remember. It was fast. They said anonymity was part of the ritual. He let that hang, then wrote, cannot provide names. Prior cash service $2,800, 10/18. His penmanship was priestly and precise. We climbed to the attic. The air held that faint sweetness again. Glycerinous echo. Deacon touched the duct, wiped residue onto his thumb, and sniffed. Stage fog, he said, not accusing, just placing a label where a mystery had lived. I said seen this before at weddings. People like drama. Back downstairs, he sat at the kitchen table and opened a small vial of holy water. Not dramatic, almost domestic. A single drop tapped the oak like rain. This is not for ghosts, he said. It's setis for us. A reminder that light is patient. He asked if he could record notes. Only with your consent. I agreed. He set a small digital recorder on the table, its red eye winking into life, and began aloud, November 2nd, 2024, Salem, Massachusetts. House of Harris Cole. Observations, mechanical timing of auditory phenomena, appliance synchronization, residue consistent with glycerin-based fog, prior cash transaction to unnamed cleansing service. Lena lingered in the doorway. The deacon looked up. May I ask you something delicate? She nodded. When you feel unsafe, he said, what do you reach for? Noise? Control? Cash? It was such an odd trinity that it unraveled her. She sat down slowly, robe sighing. When I was a kid, she said, eyes fixed on a point past us. We moved whenever the rent ran late. I learned that money keeps the floor from vanishing. If there's SEP's cash, you can stay. Her voice thinned. I just wanted to feel safe by Christmas. The deacon SEP's pencil didn't move. He let her sentence land, then settle. Thank you, he said. That SEP's honest. If confession is a kind of heat, the room warmed by a degree. I hated and pitied her in equal measure. Both are true things. When he left at 10:31, he shook my hand and with equal gravity shook Lena's. On the porch, he said to me privately, document, be kind in your heart, firm in your actions. He tapped the recorder in his pocket. If you want these notes later, it will be with your consent written here. He showed me the consent line, blank. We signed together, preserve, don't confront. Lin Chu's voice returned like a measured echo. So I preserved. Step 1. Rekey the cellar. At noon I drove to a locksmith on North Street, came back with a new cylinder and 3 keys. The invoice read rekey service, $139. I swapped out the old brass, bagged the cylinder in a freezer zip, date, time, location sharpied on the label, and locked the new key into my pocket. The moment the bolt clicked, something in the house exhaled. At least that's what it felt like through my fingers on the knob. Step 2. Install cameras. 2 pinhole cams, one facing the hall vent, one in the attic aimed along the duct where the fog hose ran. I placed the hall cam in a bowl of potpourri. Lena never touched, angling it with a pinch of dried lavender. The attic cam hid inside an old paint can with a slit cut near the rim. Both fed to a local SD card. No cloud, no drama, just quiet witness. I tested timestamps against my kitchen clock. Within 1 minute's drift, which I noted in the margin of my notebook, cams plus 0058 drift. Adjust in log. At 2:18 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Marla. Venmo pulls $1,600 sent to Spectral Solutions on October 17th. Note weekend package. The screenshot arrived a beat later. Lena's handle at the top, the stylized ghost logo, I recognized from the link spam on her livestream. I saved it to a folder titled House Evidence and copied the file name to the ledger. Venmo 1600 underscore spectral underscore 10-17.png. I forwarded everything. Stan's relay and speaker photos, Deacon's preliminary notes memo, Marla's stills and the Venmo image to Attorney Sue. Within the hour, she replied with draft preservation letters, one to the pop-up cleansing crew, one to Evan's brokerage, one to Lena via our shared email, each on her firm's letterhead, polite and pointed as scalpels. Please preserve and do not destroy or alter any documents, communications or devices relating to. It was both boring and terrifying. The way real consequences always look in black and white. At 4:07 p.m., I tucked the physical relay and speaker into a small banker's box with foam between them. Chain Harris Cole retained, I wrote on a card inside. I placed Stan's draft affidavit, unsigned pending his notary appointment, in a clear sleeve and slid it behind them. Evidence doesn't live in drawers. It lives where it can breathe and be found. Night came early. At 6:11 p.m., the gulls went quiet, and in their place a neighborhood motorcycle coughed to life, revved twice, and throttled away. The house waited. I waited with it. At 7:03 p.m., a dry tick began from somewhere inside the dining room wall. Not the whisper yet. A tick, analog. Measured, I opened the drawer beneath the sideboard where we kept candles and tea towels. Taped to the underside, an old-school dial timer clicked toward 0, its face covered with painter's tape to dull the sound. It was set to cycle every 20 minutes. I let it run and looked at my watch. 20 minutes later, the vent whispered, obedient as a trained dog. The timer ticked one more time like it was winking at me. I peeled the timer free, snapped a photo with the painter's tape still on, then returned it to its spot. Preserve. Don't confront. Lena moved around the living room that evening like a ghost made of lotion and scent, lighting candles that didn't need lighting, touching frames that didn't need dusting. She caught me watching her and crossed the room, laid a hand on my chest, a choreography we'd learned years ago and never unlearned. Are you angry with me? She asked, eyes large, wet, weaponized, and sincere all at once. I am some tired, I said. Both true things. Her hand fell. I just want to be safe, she whispered. Safety without truth is a rental, I said before I could stop myself. You never get to keep it. She flinched like I set blown out a candle in her hands. I waited until the house settled. At 10:40 p.m., I climbed to the attic, checked the cam's tiny green LED, and listened to the duct like a seashell. The sweetness of glycerin had faded to a memory. The pipes clicked alive in the walls, hot water moving like blood. Back downstairs, I opened my notebook and on a fresh page wrote 2 words in block letters, Thanksgiving table. Beneath it, I listed who needed to sit there for truth to stick. Nora, my sister, my compass, Stan with an affidavit in his solid voice, Deacon with kindness and notes if he consented to bring them, Marla with photos, Sue on speaker, steady as a metronome, and Lena, of course. And if Providence was in a generous mood, Evan finding a reason to stop by uninvited. I drew a little square to stand in for the TV and wrote smart plug log cast beside it. Not yet installed. That would be a November 20th job. But I liked seeing the plan on paper, like framing a wall before you raise it. At 11:06 p.m., the whisper returned, soft as a lie, told for a good reason. Get out. I stood, set a single place at the dining table, plate, fork, napkin, then pulled the analog timer from the drawer and placed it on the plate like a pilgrim seps fruit. We stir going to eat the clock, I told the empty room, and then we stir going to eat the truth. Down the hall, a door clicked. Footsteps paused, then silence. I boxed the timer, labeled it, analog dial _1102, and slid it into the banker's box beside the relay and the vent speaker. I closed the lid and wrote in my ledger's tidy inspector's hand, November 2nd. Deacon visit, notes recorded with consent. Seller rekey $139, old cylinder bagged. 2 pinhole cams installed, hall attic. Venmo $1,600 to Spectral Solutions confirmed. Preservation letters sent. Analog timer discovered in dining drawer returned for continuity later bagged. When I capped my pen, the house felt different. Not safer, exactly, just legible. The kind of legible that invites a final chapter. I turned off the dining room light, left the banker's box on the sideboard like a small, square promise, and whispered the plan into the dark the way a child might say a prayer. Thanksgiving, I said. Blessing of truth. Everyone eats. The vent stayed quiet, as if even the ghost had nothing left to add. By the second week of November, the house had developed a new voice. Not the measured knocks, not the vent whisper loop. This was lighter, crueler. A child's laugh, high and bright, piped through at dusk like the soundtrack of a horror movie no one asked to star in. The first time it happened, November 10th, at exactly 5:06 p.m., I was setting down a mug of tea when the giggle slipped through the vents. Too sharp, too rehearsed, I froze, spoon hovering above the sugar jar, the sound echoing across plaster and pine like some grotesque family recording. My pen rolled off the counter. Did you hear that? Lena asked. Feigning panic, hand to her chest. I heard, I said flatly. Inside I wrote child laugh loop, dusk, November 10th. My handwriting was steady. My pulse was not. By November 12th, the cellar knob bore fresh scars. The brass cylinder I had rekeyed barely 10 days earlier showed new scuff marks, faint but visible when I angled my flashlight. Someone had tested it, maybe forced it, maybe just practiced. I photographed it, dime for scale, then brushed the filings into a small envelope and labeled it cellar tamper _1112. When I showed the envelope to my sister Nora over coffee that morning, her lips tightened. She's not stopping, she said. She thinks if the house is loud enough, I set'll run. And will you? She asked gently. No, I said, not until daylight burns through. At night, my pinhole cameras dutifully blinked. The hall cam caught the grill trembling faintly whenever the bass hum of a hidden speaker kicked in. Dust plumed around the edges like fog on a stage. The attic cam recorded nothing more dramatic than settling insulation, but sometimes nothing is proof. On November 18th, a $119 charge posted to the joint card. Vendor Audio Tricks Electronics. Memo line, motion sensor. I circled it in red on the printout and taped it to the inside of my ledger. Proof layered on proof. 2 days later, Marla sent me video stills. Evan Pike captured in the dim wash of a storage unit lot, unloading a black case clearly labeled Fogger Pro 4000. Timestamp November 20th, 3:42 p.m. He looked over his shoulder once, twice, then slid the case into Unit 112 before pulling the corrugated door down. I forwarded the still to Attorney Sue with the caption supply line confirmed. Her reply came back quick. Hold, logger, next. So that same evening, November 20th, I installed a smart plug logger on the vent speaker in the hall. A tiny square, flush with the wall, recording every on-off cycle. If someone flipped it from a phone, if it ran on a timer, if Lena or Evan nudged it, the logger would know. The house pulsed with tension now. Lena moved through rooms like a director backstage, candles in hand, eyes wide. Every time a giggle looped through the vents, she sept, clutch her chest, whisper, "It sep's worse, Harris. Don't you feel it?" I felt it, but not the way she meant. On November 14th, I almost broke. The laughter spilled through while I was alone at the table, reviewing Stan's affidavit and Deacon's notes. The sound was so cruelly placed, like mocking my father's house with the one thing it never gave me, children. I slammed my hand on the table, rose halfway, and for one dangerous second I wanted to rip the vent out with my bare hands and scream. Enough. Instead, I called Nora. She picked up on the second ring, her voice steady. Talk to me, she said. I don't know if I can keep doing this, I admitted. I don't want to humiliate her. She sips, already unraveling. Nora Set's silence was kind, not judgmental. Then truth is in Set's cruelty, Harris. Truth is consent for the future. Without it, you set both prisoners. I leaned my forehead against the cold plaster wall, so I let everyone see. Yes, she said. You don't set secrecy to a lie. That night, I sat in the living room with the banker's box on my lap, lifting each item one by one: the relay, the vent speaker, the analog timer, the Venmo screenshot, the fog kit receipt. I stacked them like tarot cards of betrayal. My hand shook, but not from fear anymore, from resolve. By November 22nd, the smart plug logger had recorded 6 cycles, each matching times when Lena claimed the house was acting up. Exact toggles at 8:41 p.m., 9:02 p.m., 11:05 p.m., November 15th, 20. The data was clean, undeniable. On November 23rd, I tested the logger myself, switching the speaker on at 7:16 p.m. and off at 7:20. The log showed both entries. Perfect. Evidence doesn't set lie. With Thanksgiving 1 week away, I circled the date on my kitchen calendar in thick red ink. November 28th, dinner, truth. The plan was simple. Set the turkey, set the trap, set my voice. The house seemed to sense it. By November 25th, the laughter stopped. The whispers paused. Only silence remained, a silence so heavy it pressed on the walls. On November 27th, the eve of the holiday, Lena floated into the kitchen in a red sweater. Smile gentle. Tomorrow will be nice, she said softly, touching the back of my neck. Yes, I replied. Tomorrow will be nice. But my eyes were on the banker's box, closed and labeled on the sideboard. Inside, the evidence waited like a second meal. On Thanksgiving Day, I rose before dawn, basted the turkey, and set the table with Nora's help. By 5:17 p.m., candles glowed, glasses sparkled, and the air was thick with both rosemary and tension. I stood back, looked at the table, and thought, this is it. The house will speak, but not with whispers, with proof. I took a slow breath and whispered the last line of my notebook entry aloud. Set the turkey, set the trap, set my voice. Thanksgiving tasted like nerves. By 5:17 p.m., rosemary and butter floated through the dining room, clinging to the old wainscoting like memory. Candles flickered in the antique holders my father swore were too fussy for men, but perfect for homes. Nora set the last fork, then squeezed my shoulder, our family's silent benediction. The banker's box waited on the sideboard, square and patient. Guests arrived in a gentle parade. Stan Reese first, button-down tool belt left in his van, affidavit folder tucked under his arm as if it were a pie. Deacon O'Rourke next, coat dusted with the faintest powder of early snow, legal pad in his satchel. Marla slipped in quietly, a polite smile covering eyes that missed nothing. Attorney Lin Su pinged my phone at 5:31 p.m. On call and ready. Cast to TV when you're set. I tested the smart plug app on my phone, logger connected, and felt my pulse climb like a man about to step onto a stage he built with his own hands. Lena floated between kitchen and table in a cranberry sweater, sleeves pushed to her elbows, cheeks bright. A perfect hostess in a perfect scene she believed she could direct. Everyone, welcome, she said, lighting the last candle though the room was already bright. I hope you don't mind one small silly thing we might hear the house tonight. A soft laugh, a soft flinch. If it happens, we'll ignore it and be grateful anyway. Nora met my eyes. I nodded once. We ate in the warm music of forks, the dry chuckle of Stan's stories, Deacon's gentle questions, Marla's quiet asides. For 20 minutes, the house behaved like a house. My shoulders dropped the way they used to on normal holidays. Then at 5:36 p.m., right on dusk, the vent exhaled a thin, tinny syllable. Get out. Conversation tripped, then stumbled to a halt. Glasses hovered halfway to lips. The vent trembled as if it were a throat. Lena set down the gravy boat with a tremor. It's worse around holidays, she whispered, exactly to the room and exactly to nobody. I stood, napkin folded on the table like a flag of truce. Before dessert, I said, steady, we're going to do a different kind of blessing, a blessing of truth. No pleading, no anger, just the cadence you use when the only way forward is through. I tapped the remote. The TV over the sideboard woke into a mirrored laptop screen. The smart plug log app, a neat list of timestamps and toggles. My cursor circled the most recent entry, 5 hours 16 minutes and 40 seconds p.m. Device on. 20 seconds later, a second line, 5 hours 17 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. Audio event, my note added. And now, as if on cue in front of witnesses, the house whispered again. Get out. I let the room inhale. That, I said, isn't a spirit. That is a device that just toggled at 5 hours 16 minutes and 40 seconds. I clicked to the previous entries, each with the tidy precision of a metronome. November 20th, 8:41 p.m. on, 9:02 p.m. on, 11:05 p.m. on. Everyone aligned with the moments Lena had told friends and followers. It's happening again. Across the table, Lena's fork hung from her fingers like a silver question mark. I picked up a screwdriver from the sideboard, not hidden, not dramatic, and crossed to the dining room vent. Stan, I said. Would you witness? He stood beside me, calm as a man measuring wire. I eased the screws one by one. The grill came away. A smear of painter's adhesive tugged like gum. I slid my hand inside and lifted out a small black speaker box glued to the duct. A thin gasp moved through the table like a breeze through leaves. Stan cleared his throat and opened his folder. For the record, he said, reading with that precise electrician's voice, I Stanley Rizzi, Massachusetts Master Electrician License Number. He read the number, inspected the Cole residence on October 28, 2024. Findings include 1. A remote relay wired to the hall circuit behind a decorative faceplate. 2. A motion-triggered speaker adhered inside the return vent. 3. Glycerin residue along attic ductwork consistent with stage fog distribution. He tapped the edges of the page, squared them. Affidavit signed and notarized at 3:10 p.m. today. I set the speaker on a white dessert plate because something in me liked the irony. Ghost a la carte, I said. And my voice didn't shake. Deacon rose next, not to preach but to witness. He slipped a thin stack of notes from his satchel. With Harris's consent, he said, I recorded observations on November 2nd appliance cycles synchronized with auditory phenomena, regular intervals inconsistent with spontaneous sounds, prior cash payment to unnamed cleansing service. He set his palm on the table, warm and human. There is no demon in this house, he said kindly, looking at Lena as if she were the one who needed the gentleness most. Only devices and the fear they were designed to sell. Lena stared at the plate with the black box like it might sprout teeth. She swallowed. I don't understand. I lifted the pale green slip from the banker's box, held it so candlelight turned the ink shiny. You paid $2,800 cash on October 18th, I said, the day before the first knocks. I didn't throw it. I didn't accuse. I placed it on the table by her water glass, the way you set down a bill you both knew was coming. Her lips parted like she might push the lie out and breathe. Nothing came. The house, mercifully, went silent. Lena, I said, softer, tell the truth. It happened the way ice breaks on a river. No clean crack, just a long, reluctant groan. Her eyes shined too bright. Her voice arrived too small. When I was little, she said, staring at the slip. We used to have to move when Dad lost jobs. Mom kept a suitcase by the door. I swore I'd never go back to that feeling. Evans said. She flinched at his name in the open air. He said, if you scared easy, we could be safe by Christmas. Cash buyers, no months of repairs. Just done. Done, I repeated, as if tasting a foreign word, by selling my father Sep's house, as if it were sick. She wiped at her cheek, angry at her own tears. I wanted money to feel safe, she said. I wanted the floor not to vanish. Across the table, Deacon's pencil did not move. He offered a tissue, not a verdict. I reached under the sideboard and pulled the drawer free, taped to its underside. Where my fingers had found it weeks before, the analog dial timer tick-ticked toward another cycle. I set it beside the speaker. This is your ghost's heartbeat, I said. It's not supernatural. It's just mean. This to side. The room breathed in unison. Marla's phone buzzed against her thigh. One short alert, she glanced down, then to me, asking with her eyes if she should speak. Go ahead, I said. She cleared her throat. This may be a good time to mention that Mr. Pike just turned onto your street. She raised her phone so the table could see the screen, a live camera feed from the corner where Derby meets our block. Evan's car idled at the curb. His expression, that particular blend of charm and calculation I'd seen before on billboards. Lena stood so fast, her chair skid. I need air, she whispered, fleeing to the porch. Through the dining room glass, we watched her stop 2 steps down, wrap her arms around herself against a wind that wasn't that cold. 2 houses away, Evan checked his reflection in his windshield. When he finally looked up, he met the reciprocal gaze of Marla's lens from our stoop, unblinking, professional, real. He hesitated, then turned away, pulling his collar up like a man who believes in luck more than law. I didn't chase him. None of us did. Predators don't deserve the dignity of a script they can co-opt. Inside, I put the last item on the table, the banker's box, open to its neat inventory card, and the words chain of custody in my slow inspector's print. The relay, the speaker, the timer, the Venmo screenshot of $1,600 to its Spectral Solutions, October 17th weekend package. Stan's affidavit, Deacon's notes. Marla's Cafe still, Lena and Evan at Jolie on October 27th. If he spooks, list as is. The smart plug log still mirrored on the TV, the cursor pulsing at 5 hours, 16 minutes, and 40 seconds, like a small, calm heartbeat. Nora reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. It steps over, she said quietly. Whatever happens next, the lie can set breathe here anymore. Lena came back in, sweater sleeves bunched in fists. She stood behind her chair, eyes moving across the evidence like someone reading her own handwriting on a wall. I'm sorry, she said, and the words were both too little, and the only first words possible. I don't know how to fix it yet, but I won't lie anymore. Good, I said, because from here on, everything steps in daylight. Deacon closed his notes with a soft click. There's steps grace in telling the truth, he said. There's steps also consequence. Both are medicine. I looked at the TV, at the numbers. I looked at the plate with the black box. I looked at the initials in the mantel, HEC catching candlelight the way old things do when they choose to be seen. Dessert, I said finally, because life has to keep moving, even through revelations. And then tomorrow we make calls. We ate pie without small talk, which felt like a new kind of honesty. Afterward, I handed Marla a sealed envelope with a spare SD card from the attic cam, and gave Stan the bag with the relay to keep until morning. Deacon tucked his recorder away only after I nodded. Nora stacked dishes with the deliberate care of someone resetting a room after a storm. When the last guest stepped into the cold, I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the wood. Lena stood in the doorway to the hall, smaller than she had ever looked in this house. I'll give you the Venmo logins, she said, and the storage unit code. I can set, she swallowed. I can set carry this another night. Tomorrow at 9, I said. We sit down with Lynn on speaker and map the path. Counseling or separation. Written admissions. Preservation of everything. No drama, just paper. She nodded, one small, exhausted nod, then went upstairs. I stayed where I was, listening to the house not whisper. The silence was heavier than sound, but kinder too. On the way to bed, I opened the banker's box and laid the analog timer on top, like a trophy I never wanted. I wrote one last line in my ledger for the day, the neat letters marching like soldiers across the page. November 28th, truth told at table. Witnesses present, devices recovered, admission begun. When I turned out the light, the vent stayed dumb and honest. For the first time in months, footsteps behind me belonged only to me. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house felt like it had shed 20 pounds of lies. Sunlight struck the mantel straight on. No flicker, no whisper, just the steady light my father always said was the best test of a window seal. At 9 a.m. sharp, Nora poured coffee at the dining table while I opened my laptop. Attorney Ashu joined us on speaker. Her voice was measured, each syllable clipped with the kind of precision that only comes from years of court filings. Here sept is how this will proceed, she said. We freeze joint accounts. We file a demand letter against the brokerage. And Harris, you begin 2 tracks. Reconciliation or separation. Both require documentation. I stared at the banker's SIPS box on the sideboard. We have documentation. Yes, she replied. Now we use it. At 9:15 a.m., I printed her draft demand letter. The machine's whir filled the kitchen while Lena stood at the window, robe wrapped tight, eyes hollow. The letter was polite, deadly in its clarity. Your brokerage participated in or was aware of harassment designed to force a distressed sale. Preserve all communications. When the printer spat the final page, Nora slid it into a folder with the efficiency of a nurse triaging in the ER. At 10:04 a.m., Sue emailed the bank. Within an hour, our joint accounts were frozen. The app on Lena Sepp's phone flashed insufficient access when she tried to log in. She didn't argue. She just set the phone face down and whispered, "So this is real." Deacon visited at noon, carrying not scripture but soup. He sat across from Lena at the kitchen table, his recorder on the placemat, red light blinking. "Only with your consent," he said. She nodded. Her voice shook, but the words came clear. I wanted money to feel safe. I staged things. I let Evan talk me into it. I didn't think about what it would do to Harris or to this house. I only thought about not being afraid anymore. Her hands folded in front of her like a child reciting lines. She signed the consent form. Deacon slid across the table. He placed it gently in his satchel. At 2:30 p.m., Marla arrived with a sealed manila envelope, inside surveillance stills, receipts pulled from the storage unit, and a USB drive. "You'll want this one," she said, sliding over a photo of a receipt taped to the inside of a trunk. The trunk itself was still locked in the cellar. With Salem PD on standby, I turned the new brass key. The hinges groaned. Inside, bulk receipts for haunting kits, motion speakers, fog fluids, timers. Folders labeled investor contacts. A notepad with Evans' brokerage letterhead. Scribbled in his hand, list Cole House ASAP. Distress angle. I photographed everything, date stamped, dime for scale. Then I placed the trunk contents back neatly and sealed the cellar with a chain. At 4 p.m., I emailed the photos to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Subject line: evidence fraudulent staging to force distressed sale. I attached Stan's affidavit, Deacon's notes, Marla's stills, the Venmo screenshot, the $2,800 cleansing slip, 21 files total. I copied Nora, copied Shu, copied myself. Chain complete. Lena sat at the table while I typed, silent. When I finished, she whispered, "What happens to me?" I met her eyes. "That depends on whether you want to repair or run." She pressed her palms together. Exhaled. Repair. At 5:10 p.m. Yusu called again. "We'll schedule court for December 12th. Between now and then, Lena, you'll need counseling sessions documented, written admissions, and Harris. You'll need to prepare both contingencies, separation agreement, and joint therapy plan. No surprises in court. Judges hate surprises." Nora leaned forward. "So the house is safe?" "Yes," Sue said. "The house is safe. The fraud is not." By evening, the kitchen counter looked like a command center. Folders labeled accounts, receipts, devices. My ledger opened to a fresh page. The house no longer felt like a stage. It felt like an office. At 7:23 p.m., the vent rattled once, a mechanical cough, as though the ghost wanted to try one last encore. But the smart plug logger showed nothing. I unscrewed the grill, checked the duct. Empty. Silent, honest. For the first time in months, the vent sounded like a vent. That night, I carried the banker's box upstairs and set it on the dresser like a nightlight made of paper and wires. I slid into bed beside Lena, who stared at the ceiling, hands folded. "Do you hate me?" she asked softly. I considered the question. Its weight. "No," I said. "I hate what you did. I hate what it cost. But hate isn't set a place I plan to live." She turned, eyes wet. Then where do you plan to live? In daylight, I said. December 12th was circled in my ledger. Court, consequences. Closure. The house creaked in its ordinary way, boards settling after a long day, and for once the sound carried no threat, only wood, air, gravity. I fell asleep with the strange comfort of knowing that the walls no longer whispered. They held. Essex County smells like floor wax and old paper. On December 12th, I stood in a hallway the color of oatmeal, clutching a folder that had grown heavier with every copied affidavit and receipt. Nora squeezed my elbow and passed me a peppermint from her purse like we were children in a pew again. Across from us, Lena stared at a point over my shoulder. Her sweater was plain. Her hair was tied back. She looked unarmed, and in a way she was. The story had stripped itself down to facts. Colvey Hart et al., the clerk called at 9:06 a.m. We filed in. The courtroom held that quiet hum of public buildings, HVAC, shuffled paper, a cough politely stifled. Judge Armitage sat beneath the state seal, reading glasses midway down his nose. He gave the file a practiced surgical glance. Counsel appearances. Attorney Lin Shu rose with a nod that felt like a scalpel being unsheathed. For the plaintiff, Harris Cole. Across the aisle, the brokerage's lawyer, trim suit, expensive watch, announced his name. Lena had counsel appointed for the day. Her attorney stood, cleared her throat softly, and sat. Let sets be clear about what we sets are here for, Judge Armitage said, voice even. Alleged harassment for the purpose of forcing a distressed sale, involvement of a licensed brokerage, and requested injunctive relief. History began with the map. Not a speech, she hated speeches, but a chain. Your Honor, we will move through 5 exhibits and 3 witness statements. Each item speaks to motive, method, and intent. She clicked a remote. The courtroom monitor lit with Exhibit A, Stan's affidavit, license number bold at the top. Master electrician's sworn statement. Who said, October 28th inspection. Findings remote relay on a household circuit. A motion-triggered speaker adhered inside a return vent. Glycerin residue consistent with fog distribution through ductwork. Photos attached. Stan in his only suit sat upright in the gallery, hands folded like wire in a neat loop. Exhibit B, Heishu continued. The monitor showed a clean scan of Deacon O'Rourke's notes. With the homeowner's consent, observations recorded November 2nd. Appliance cycles synchronized with auditory phenomena. Regular 20-second intervals inconsistent with spontaneous household noises. Prior cash payment to an unnamed cleansing service in the amount of $2,800 on October 18th. She handed the judge a copy. The deacon is a pastoral counselor trained to triage alleged hauntings. His protocol, first the natural, then the supernatural. A faint smile touched the Judge Sip's mouth. Sensible. Exhibit C. The green slip filled the screen. Cleansing service, $2,800. Paid cash, 10/18. This predates the very first Hemoth phenomenon SIP reported in the home by a day. Ishu said, it suggests preparation, not response. Exhibit D. The digital log of the smart plug, the cursor pulsing at 5 hours 16 minutes and 40 seconds p.m. This shows device toggles on November 20th and on Thanksgiving evening at 5 hours 16 minutes and 40 seconds, 20 seconds before a recorded T-whisper sipping in front of 6 witnesses. Exhibit E. A split screen. Marla's still from Jolie Cafe, October 27th, 4:12 p.m. with the subtitle If He Spooks, list as is, and the storage lot still November 20th, 3:42 p.m. of Evan moving the Fogger Pro 4000 into Unit 112. Private investigators' surveillance, lawfully obtained from public vantage points, Shu said. And finally Venmo $1,600 to its Spectral Solutions on 10/17. Memo weekend package, plus a brokerage email blast promising investor interest if a home becomes unlivable. To Shu, let her hands rest at her sides. Motive, acquire a legacy property fast as the tree test method. Create the appearance of a haunting, knocks, whispers, fog. Intent, pressure the homeowner to vacate and sell Dada's zest pit to investor clients. My client chose not to run. He documented. The brokerage attorney stood. Your Honor, my client denies any harassment. Any emails were routine marketing. There is no evidence that the brokerage installed devices. Sit, the judge said, not unkindly. We settle here each witness. Stan took the stand first. He spoke like he writes wire diagrams, clean, unadorned, steady. He described finding the relay behind the faceplate, the vent speaker glued inside the return, the glycerin on ductwork. He explained the chain of custody, bagged, labeled, transferred to me, scheduled for notary. He didn't speculate. He simply laid wire where wire belonged. The judge asked one question. Mr. Rizzi, could these installations be accidental? No, Your Honor, Stan said. You don't accidentally glue a speaker inside a return. That's SIP's a choice. Deacon followed. He didn't wear a collar. The courtroom didn't need theater. He described the timing between the fridge compressor and the oven ding, 20 seconds. He described the calm way he touches vents with his palm. He described asking Lena for the names of the cleansers and her inability to provide them. No demon, he said gently. Devices and fear. Head Sue called Marla, who identified the cafe photo and the storage lot video still. She explained how long she worked, how many hours she logged, what she did not capture because she does not guess. I watched, she said. I recorded that Seps all. When it was time, Sue didn't call me to the stand to tell a story. She called me to authenticate the ledger. Mr. Cole, she said, is this your notebook? It is. Are these your entries made contemporaneously? They are. Why did you keep it? Because I didn't want to fight a ghost, I said, and the gallery smiled softly. I wanted to follow a timetable. The judge leaned back. Mrs. Hart, he said at last, turning to Lena Sip's table, you may decline, but if you wish to speak, now Sip's your moment. Lena rose. Her attorney touched her sleeve. She nodded. I'll speak, she said, voice even. She didn't look at me, and I didn't ask her to. I was afraid, she said, not of ghosts, of money. Evan told me investors would buy quickly if the house felt unsafe. I bought fog. I hired a service. I let myself believe I had a reason. I didn't. She lifted her chin. I'm sorry. Silence. Not the punishing kind. The kind that lets a thing land. The brokerage attorney tried one more time. Your Honor, even if Miss Hart acted improperly, there's no direct evidence Mr. Pike or the brokerage instructed. The judge held up a hand. Counsel, I have the cafe photo, the storage unit still, and a marketing blast about unlivable homes sent to this specific address days after the so-called phenomena began. I'm referring this record to Consumer Protection for review of brokerage practices. He turned a page. As to injunctive relief, granted. His ruling came measured, specific, almost beautiful in its articulation. Injunction prohibiting further interference with the plaintiff Seps's quiet enjoyment of his home. Order removing Miss Hart from title, quit claim to Mr. Cole within 7 days. Restitution, return of $9,400 and odd withdrawals traced to the staging scheme. Damages for repairs and remediation, $3,500. No contact order as between Miss Hart and Mr. Cole for 90 days except through counsel or therapist. Brokerage reprimand entered on the record. Matter referred to the Attorney General Sef's Consumer Protection Division. He looked over his glasses at me. Mr. Cole, keep your chain of custody. You did the right thing documenting instead of escalating. Then to Lena. Miss Hart. Fear of poverty explains but does not excuse. Repair yourself where you can. Leave the plaintiff Sep's home alone. The gavel's rap was light. It still sounded like thunder. Outside, winter air salted my lungs. Reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't that kind of story. Just the honest kind, the kind neighbors pass on porches when they talk about where they were the day truth arrived with paperwork. Nora looped her arm through mine. You okay? I am, I said. For the first time in months, I am. My phone buzzed. An email from Hoshu, settlement addendum attached. Brokerage to pay $15,000 plus costs. If you agree not to sue for defamation, read don't sign without me. Another buzz, a calendar invite for a locksmith on December 20th. Full Reiki, a final ritual to match the legal one. I turned toward the courthouse steps. Behind me, Lena stood with the deacon, speaking low. He listened, he has a talent for that. I didn't linger. Mercy is a gift. Proximity is not a requirement. On Derby Street, the wind carried the smell of chowder from a diner and the faint tang of the harbor. I put my hand on my father's watchband and loosened it one notch more. The house waited a mile away, unhaunted and wholly mine the way he meant it to be. For the first time in months, footsteps behind me belonged only to me. December bled into itself like paint into water. For the first time in months, the walls of the house sounded like walls, not speakers. Every creak belonged to timber, not tricks. I woke each morning not to whispers, but to the ordinary tick of the heater, the stretch of wood against cold. On December 14th, I bought paint, a simple gallon of eggshell white from the hardware store on Lafayette, $42.19. Receipt tucked in my ledger. I rolled it over the dining room walls where the vent had once hissed, "Get out." The roller made its own steady music, a swish-swish rhythm like a metronome of reclamation. Each stroke erased another shadow. 2 days later, I hired a licensed electrician, one of Stan's apprentices, to install proper GFCI outlets in the kitchen. $210 total. Invoice signed. Real wires, real safety, not stagecraft. I watched him test the circuits with a small orange light. All clear, he said, smiling. That phrase landed deeper than he knew. At night, I sat in the living room with a mug of coffee and my father's shoebox. Inside, the devices I'd bagged: relay, vent speaker, analog timer, resting like fossils. On the lid, I scrawled a single word in black marker: lessons. Not trophies, not curses. Lessons. Proof of what people will do when they're afraid. Proof of what I will do when pressed. I wrote my father a letter on plain lined paper, the way he'd once written grocery lists, blocky, unapologetic. Dad, I didn't run. They tried to turn your house into a carnival. I stayed. I measured. I proved. The initials you carved into the mantel still hold. I hope that matters. I folded the letter into the shoebox, shut the lid, and felt something in me exhale. The days moved forward gently. Nora visited with casseroles and news from the hospital. Stan dropped by with a spare socket tester just because. Marla texted once, "AG has opened inquiry. You'll be looped in if they need you." Deacon brought coffee and said something I wrote down verbatim: "Discernment is love with a flashlight." I taped that to the inside of my ledger's back cover, so I'd see it each time I closed a day. On December 18th, a final email arrived from Shu, subject settlement. The brokerage agreed to pay $15,000 plus costs in exchange for not pursuing a defamation claim. She wrote, "Ledger closes here if you choose. You've won more than money, Harris. You've won daylight." I read it 3 times. $15,000 wouldn't buy back the weeks of whispers, the nights of fear, the marriage bent by fraud, but it would buy closure. And closure has its own currency. That night, I set the dining table alone, not with candles, not with guests, just with a single plate and fork. I set the shoebox at the opposite seat. "Here sips to you," I said quietly, "to the lesson that daylight burns stronger than whispers." The heater ticked once. The floor settled, and that was all. December 20th, the locksmith came, final rekey, full sweep of every cylinder. New keys gleamed in my palm, teeth sharp and unspent. I dropped the old ones into a paper envelope and sealed it. Boundary, not cruelty. Lena had given me the Venmo logins, the storage code, the rest of the admissions. She was elsewhere now in therapy sessions I didn't attend. That was her ledger to keep. The house was mine again. Honest, unhaunted, still standing. In the evenings, I sat by the mantel and traced my father's initials, HC, rough, under fresh polish. I thought about how easily stories can be sold, how quickly fear can become currency. And I thought about what remains when you refuse to buy in. "You didn't instead lose me," I whispered into the quiet. "You gave me away, and I walked home with the deed." The house answered with silence. The good kind. December 22nd arrived with a hush of snow. Not the blizzard kind, just the light, steady sift that softens even Salem's sharp edges. I stood on the porch, watching flakes settle into the cracks of the old stone steps, and turned the final new key in the lock. The bolt slid clean, solid, mine. I'd asked the locksmith to do a full sweep, front, back, cellar, attic, hatch. No more half measures, no more tampered cylinders. When he handed me the envelope of duplicates, I felt something I hadn't felt since September control. I sealed the old brass keys in another envelope, scrawled Lena Hart, returned, December 22nd, 24 across the flap, and delivered them to Attorney Hughes' office. Boundary, not cruelty. That same morning, an email arrived from the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Subject: inquiry opened. They'd reviewed the receipts, Marla's stills, the Venmo logs, and my affidavit. Spectral Solutions LLC, the so-called cleansing crew, was now under investigation for consumer fraud. I forwarded the message to Nora, then to Stan, then to Marla. Their replies came back in kind. Nora: proud of you. Dad would be too. Stan: good chain work. Call if they need testimony. Marla: told you vultures don't set last long once the sun hits. At noon I met Deacon for chowder at the diner on Derby Street. We sat by the window, snow feathering down, and he asked me, "What sep's the house teaching you now?" I stirred the soup, steam fogging my glasses. "That silence isn't set always emptiness," I said. "Sometimes it sets peace." He smiled, pleased, and tapped his legal pad closed without taking a note. Then the work is working. The rest of December passed in small rituals. I sanded the cellar steps smooth where brass filings had once scattered. I rehung the storm door that had squealed like a warning every time it opened. I even replaced the porch light bulb, something so trivial I'd ignored it for months while chasing phantoms. Each fix felt like reclaiming a square foot of honesty. Lena and I communicated through counsel only. A therapist's note confirmed she was attending weekly sessions. Part of me ached at that distance, at what we'd lost. But another part, the part that had sat through nights of 20-second whispers, knew space was necessary. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're mercy with edges. On Christmas Eve, Nora brought over a pie. We ate at the dining table that had once hosted whispers and staged fog. This time only laughter rose, ordinary and unlooped. I carved a slice, set it on a second plate across from me, and joked, "for the ghost." Nora rolled her eyes, but the smile lingered. The new year would bring more paperwork, maybe depositions, maybe follow-ups with the AG, but in that moment the ledger felt closed enough to rest. I wrote my final entry of 2024 in the notebook, neat and slow. December 22nd, keys reissued, AG inquiry opened. Home intact, legacy preserved. I underlined it twice, then shut the cover. Outside, Derby Street slept under snow. Inside, the house finally sounded like what it was: wood, brick, air, time, not haunted, not staged, just mine. And in that silence, earned at last, I felt something close to peace. January arrived with brittle cold and the sound of Salem Harbor iced over. I sat by the fireplace one morning, newspaper spread across my lap, when irony tapped me on the shoulder. There, on page B3, was a half-page ad from Evans Brokerage, a glossy headline in gold font, "Respecting Historic Homes Since 1998. The copy promised integrity, care, tradition. The photo showed a gabled Victorian not unlike mine, bathed in warm evening light. I laughed, soft, startled, almost kind. Respecting homes? Evan had tried to turn mine into a carnival attraction. I clipped the ad, folded it into the shoebox with the relay and the vent speaker. Lessons. That was the word I'd written on the lid. And irony deserved to live among them. Outside, snow sifted down, whitening Derby Street. The world moved forward. Investigations, settlements, separations. But inside my house, the rhythm slowed to human pace. I cooked breakfast without fear of oven dings playing on cue. I replaced fog with the honest steam of boiling water. I lived in a home again, not a stage. The appraiser came on January 9th. He walked the rooms with a clipboard, noting repairs, nodding at the clean wiring, tapping the GFCI outlets. He looked at the mantel, at my father's initials carved rough into wood, and said, "This house carries history well." His report, delivered a week later, valued the property higher than it had been at closing. Irony again, after all the staging to make it worthless. Truth had made it stronger. I recorded this story for you because silence can trick people into thinking nothing happened, but silence holds memory. Every receipt, every photo, every affidavit, those are my proof. If someone ever tries to sell you fear, ask for their receipts. The house is quiet now. The vents carry only heat. The breaker hums in its ordinary way. The shoebox of lessons waits on a shelf, not to haunt me, but to remind me daylight is patient. Fear can be staged, but truth always plays live. I trace my father's initials on the mantel some nights, whispering words he'll never hear but I needed to say. I didn't lose your house, Dad. They gave it away and I walked home with the deed. 'Cause that's the final irony, isn't it? Ghosts didn't steal from me. Fear didn't own me. Greed didn't win. You didn't lose me, I whispered into the warm air. You gave me away, and I walked home with the deed. And the house, honest and whole, whispered back with silence. The good kind,